I record this log with hands steady, though my mind wavers beneath the weight of what we have encountered. The void ship Eidolon's Veil descended into orbit over Zyphera at 0317 Standard Galactic Time. From the charts, this world should be dead, barren, lifeless, unremarkable, but the sensors scream otherwise. Atmospheric analysis indicates a resonance within the warp that should be impossible. Zyphera possesses no sun, no tectonic motion, yet the entire planet pulses with an energy signature, rhythmic, deliberate, as if breathing. I have never witnessed such a phenomenon. The crew's voices are subdued, hushed beneath the hum of the void drives. Ash storms, swept by relentless gales, shroud the surface, each particle charged with a subtle psychic interference that makes metal instruments jitter and human perception falter. The first reconnaissance drones were dispatched. They did not return, and the second one sent recorded something I cannot rationalize. A figure, humanoid in silhouette, impossibly tall, its limbs stretching beyond any human or Astartes norm. It moved as though the laws of physics were suggestions, not mandates, and then it vanished, not into shadow, but into the very air itself. The video feed shows no trace, yet all sensors recorded displacement, a folding of space itself. I am Inquisitor Vero, tasked with investigation under Ordo Malleus oversight. My orders are precise: survey, contain, and report. Yet already, within minutes of arrival, I question whether containment is possible. Below us, the ruined city sprawls like a carcass of some giant forgotten being. Its architecture is wrong. Angles that should intersect at right angles do not. Shadows fall against the light as if resisting it. Streets appear to drift overnight, subtly, though orbital scans show no tectonic activity. My mind registers a violation of fundamental law. Zyphera is alive, or something that inhabits it is. The landing team awaits on the upper deck, each member armored and armed, though I doubt weapons will matter here. Their breaths mist in the low atmospheric pressure, and I note a peculiar detail. The ash moves contrary to wind patterns, almost conscious. I cannot account for it. Orders are given. Proceed to the drop points, maintain formation, report all anomalies. The first view of the city is astonishing in its impossibility. Buildings rise in spires, some inverted, their foundations in midair. The ash storm creates a visual distortion, making it difficult to determine height or depth. My ocular implants register fluctuating gravitational readings, 0-point shifts, microbursts of weightless zones that have no cause. Environmental readings indicate increased humidity in areas where no moisture should exist. A faint metallic tang pervades the air, like blood in water, yet no living organism is present. Telemetry from drones indicates repeated energy surges emanating from certain zones in the city. They correspond with clusters of sigils etched into walls, some resembling Primarch iconography. Here lies the first inexplicable fact. Several of these sigils correspond to lost Primarchs, names that do not exist in sanctioned Imperial records. It is impossible, yet I see them, logged by the instruments, confirmed by multiple drone scans. The first micro-cliffhanger occurs as the reconnaissance drone moves down a central avenue. The figure appears again, taller, more defined. It pauses at a crossroads, angles impossibly bent around it, as if the city itself avoids its presence. The drone's camera lags, then dies entirely. Comms are severed, replaced by a whispering static, fragments of voices, half songs, half litanies. My auger sensors interpret the frequencies as unintelligible, yet familiar. Something in my memory itches, though I cannot place it. I order a team to descend via the drop shuttles. Ash stings eyes. Visibility is near zero, and yet forms flicker at the edge of perception. I note, clinically, the first psychological impact. Men and women hesitate, though trained, sensing something unquantifiable. Reports indicate subtle movement, shadows that do not align with any known light source. soft resonances in the ground that cannot be seismic. Equipment malfunctions occur in sequence. Grav scanners, navigational sensors, even implanted ocular arrays intermittently fail. Each time, a pattern emerges. Energy spikes in areas corresponding with the lost Primarch sigils. The first tangible anomaly: a building's doorway shifts as we approach. Walls that were perpendicular yesterday are now skewed. Corners that should meet now float apart. Acolytes report nausea and vertigo. The sensation is echoed in my own mind. I annotate these observations, alternating clinical tone with visceral reaction, for record. It is imperative that every detail be logged. As the first team touches down, I observe the surface through the viewport. The ash swirls with an intelligence. One soldier steps forward, then freezes, staring into an alleyway. My view shows nothing, yet the soldier's heartbeat is accelerated, ocular implants recording rapid dilation. Then the figure emerges again, glimpsed at the periphery of sight. Taller than any Astartes, cloaked in shifting geometry, presence bending perception itself. It moves against the wind, against the ash, and vanishes into the architecture. I record the immediate stakes. Time is critical. Orbital sensors indicate intermittent energy surges disrupting the Eidolon's Veil's navigational array. If these surges increase, the ship may be lost. If the landing party engages, the anomaly may react. Already, personnel are unaccounted for. One drone, now one soldier. The environmental data is inconsistent, sometimes simultaneously recording multiple incompatible realities. The first chapter closes with an unanswerable question. What is Zyphera? A world, a prison, a sentinel? We are in its shadow, and I suspect it watches us as surely as we attempt to observe it. All records, scans, and instruments indicate impossibility. And yet, we are here, descending into the storm, into the ruins, into a city that resists comprehension. I leave this log open-ended, as I am uncertain if future entries will exist. The shadows move, the ash thinks, and something waits, impossibly tall, patient, unseen, yet undeniably aware. Micro cliffhanger. As the shuttles pierce the storm, a distant, impossible reflection, geometry folded in on itself, glimmers like a signal, awaiting our first step inside. The storm embraced us as the shuttle broke through the ash veil. The hull groaned, Vox relays fizzled into static, and the atmosphere bled a low, ceaseless hum. Too regular to be wind, too hollow to be machinery. It resonated in the bones, in the teeth. Even the acolytes, veterans of countless campaigns, sat in silence, gauntleted hands tightening over their laser guns. No prayer was spoken aloud, yet lips moved in quiet litanies. In places like this, only ritual could hold back fear. When the ramp descended, the city opened before us like the ribcage of a god long slain. Structures rose in spirals, half collapsed, each stone block etched with sigils that seemed to ripple when one looked away. The ash storm hissed between broken pillars, coating armor in a gray film. My boots sank into soil that should have been dry, but it pulsed damp, as though water or blood lingered beneath the surface. The guard sergeant Devorn ordered the perimeter secured. Helm lenses cut through the ash haze, revealing streets that refused to align. Vox relays to the orbiting ship registered inconsistent coordinates. Some alleys looped back onto themselves, others terminated in blank stone where there should be passage. Tech priest Amara recited Binharic canticles as she recorded data, but her Vox voice quavered, distorted, half prayer, half static. The first anomaly struck within minutes. A guardsman, Cray, advanced 2 paces ahead of formation, his auspex raised. He placed one step into the shadow of a broken archway, and vanished. No cry, no distortion of light, no warp flare. His auspex clattered to the ground, still transmitting. The squad froze, weapons drawn, but the archway was bare. No tunnel, no recess, just stone. I approached. The shadow was wrong. It clung to the wall, not in accordance with the light cast by our lamps, but bent inward, as if it were a mouth swallowing illumination. I extended my gauntlet toward it. Cold, absolute, without texture, it resisted touch, yet swallowed sound. Even my breath seemed muffled when near it. The Auspex device lay just at its edge, still functioning, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. When retrieved, its recording showed Cray walking forward, and then static, as though the world itself had rejected continuity. The squad's morale fractured, but discipline held. Losses were expected. Reality itself had become hostile. Devorn barked orders, spacing men into fire teams. Amara cautioned that the architecture was not fixed. Her scans revealed minor shifts in gravitational orientation every 32 seconds. Floors tilted by fractions of a degree, unseen but cumulative. As we pressed further, the city seemed to breathe. Dust rose not in response to our motion, but in rhythm, inhaling and exhaling. The air thickened with humidity, condensing upon armor in beads that ran crimson when wiped away. I tasted it against my better judgment. Metallic, like rust or old blood. Yet chemical analysis registered only water. We marked walls as we advanced, Auspex beacons pinging our path. But upon circling a plaza, we returned to our own beacons from behind, though none had been moved. Streets had shifted. I recorded the data. The labyrinth had begun to reveal itself. It was then the inscriptions appeared clearer. At first, they were fractured sigils, simple scratches of stone weathered by storms. But when lamps illuminated them fully, the lines rearranged themselves subtly, as though alive. The inscriptions formed a recurring pattern, the numeral 12, broken and incomplete, always fractured at the same angle. The tech priest interpreted them as geometric designations, perhaps coordinates. To my eye, they resembled imperial numerals deliberately marred, unfinished, as though hiding something. One acolyte muttered a forbidden thought, a Primarchs number. I silenced him with a glance. No such records exist. None must exist. Yet the evidence lay before us, etched into walls untouched by human hands for millennia. The storm thickened as we moved deeper. The city's structures stretched taller, as though the ground itself was sinking, or we were being funneled downward. Whispers began in the vox channels, faint at first, syllables without source. At times they mirrored our own voices, repeating orders seconds after they were given, but wrong, distorted. We entered a square flanked by collapsed statues. Each was half erased, eroded beyond recognition, yet the scale was undeniable. Towering, colossal forms, perhaps once depicting beings of impossible stature. Their heads were absent, shattered deliberately. One statue, however, retained its torso, armored, yet with proportions subtly alien, too elongated, shoulders set unnaturally wide. The squad gazed in silence. Then, the movement. At the far edge of the square, past the ruin of a gate, the ash thickened unnaturally, coalescing. Within it, the figure emerged once more. Humanoid, impossibly tall, proportions wrong, bending the eye. It did not advance, did not retreat. It only watched, weapons leveled. My order was clear: hold. To fire upon it may be to acknowledge its presence in a way we could not contain. The figure shifted, and in that instant, the inscriptions across the plaza flared. Not with light, but with absence, shadows darkening, pulling deeper. A soldier broke. He screamed litanies to the Emperor and charged. The ash swirled to engulf him. He vanished mid-step as, though folded into an unseen seam of space. No blood, no sound, only absence. The plaza was silent again. The figure dissolved, as if it had never been. We regrouped with forced discipline, yet all knew we had stepped beyond the familiar. The city had taken 2 men in less than an hour, and in ways that mocked causality itself. My thoughts turned again to the fractured numeral, to statues of titanic scale, to whispers echoing through vox channels. I ended my entry with cold precision. Zyphera is not a ruin. It is alive. It rearranges itself, reshapes space, and consumes without trace. And we are within it now. Cliffhanger transition. Amara reported a final anomaly before our advance. Her auspex, corrupted with static, displayed paths into the city branching in ways not physically possible, multiple routes diverging simultaneously from the same gate. Each squad assigned a direction swore they saw the others walking into different alleys, though we all stood together. I mark this log with dread clarity. Tomorrow, we will divide the party to map the city, if the city does not already divide us itself. The division of the squads was not my decision alone. The city demanded it. Amara's auspex could not display a single, fixed path. Each scan produced divergent maps, impossible geometries branching from the same locus. To force unity would mean paralysis. Thus, 3 fire teams set out. One north toward the shattered plaza, one west into the hollowed spires, and one east into what appeared a subterranean descent. I kept with the eastern path, trusting instinct, or perhaps compulsion. From the first step, I knew something had shifted. The air pressed thicker, heavy with unseen weight. My rebreather rasped louder than before, though its filters remained clean. Each inhalation brought with it not ash, but voices. At first indistinct, mere vibration, yet as we advanced, they resolved into syllables. A litany, repeated in tones that wavered between command and lament. 7, 9, 12. Numbers, repeated over and over. The guardsmen muttered their own prayers. Louder now, the Emperor's name chanted to drown out the whispers. Yet the voices remained, audible even through sealed helm units. Amara adjusted her vox relays, claiming she detected no external signal, no logical transmission. That left only one conclusion. The voices were not heard, but impressed, directly into thought. We reached the first chamber, an antechamber carved into the roots of the spire. The walls glistened with condensation, though no source of moisture could be located. Symbols spread across the stone, arranged in spirals that bent toward the floor. They pulsed faintly, not with light, but with absence, as though the shadows themselves were being drawn inward. I traced one with a gauntlet. The air temperature dropped instantly, my visor fogging. The numerals whispered again. Louder, clearer. 7, 9, 12. One of the guardsmen, Malkai, dropped his laser gun, clutching his ears. He screamed that the voices accused him, demanded penance. His words slurred into a dialect none of us recognized, yet half familiar, like a prayer from a dream. He convulsed, limbs jerking unnaturally, and collapsed. Amara attempted medical analysis, but her augurs failed, her data slate showing only static. I knelt beside him. His eyes fluttered open, milky and unfocused, and he whispered, not in his own voice, but in something deeper, resonant, ancient. We were brothers once, we were whole, and then forgotten. The words chilled me more than any warp anomaly. I recognized their cadence, not demonic, not heretical, but imperial. A voice steeped in the authority of command, the kind that could rally worlds. The voice of a Primarch. The squad recoiled. Malky's body spasmed once more, then stilled. No heartbeat, no respiration. His flesh began to seep a red ichor, streaks running across the stone to join the spiral inscriptions. The numerals glowed faintly, fed by his blood. We dragged his body away, but the stain remained, absorbed into the stone as though the city itself drank it. We pressed onward, unease tightening like a noose. My Vox link crackled with fragments of other squads' reports. The Western team spoke of spires that inverted themselves when not directly observed. The northern team described corridors that narrowed to nothingness, only to widen again with fresh glyphs. Their words were cut by static, then replaced by whispers in perfect mimicry of their own voices, repeating phrases they had never said. The eastern descent widened into a cavern, the walls marked with sigils resembling the fractured numeral 12. Here the whispers grew deafening, layered, overlapping. It was no longer a single voice, but many speaking in harmony and discord. I recognized snatches of what could have been names, but they dissolved too quickly to capture. In the cavern's center stood a monolith, black stone, impossibly smooth, its surface reflecting not light but thought. When I looked upon it, I saw not myself but others. Colossal figures, armored, their features blurred but unmistakably human. Titans among men. I felt their presence press upon my mind like a weight of command. I should have fallen to my knees. Instead, I recorded. Clinical tones steadied my hand even as awe unsettled my core. The monolith pulsed with each whisper, vibrating subtly. Amara approached, augurs raised. Her mechadendrites trembled, Binharic prayers spilling involuntarily from her Vox synthesizer. Her analysis was terse. The stone was not stone, not any known element. It absorbed electromagnetic energy entirely. To strike it would be to strike emptiness. Then the whispers coalesced into clarity. Father left us. Father erased us. Father feared us. The words rippled across the chamber, resonant, undeniable. The guardsmen recoiled, some raising weapons. I forbade fire. To act rashly here would be to break what little sanity remained. I recorded the phrase, annotated in triplicate. Heresy, yes, but undeniable. One soldier, Jaren, broke ranks. He shouted that he saw their faces, that he recognized them. He called them brothers, spoke names lost to us all. He stepped toward the monolith, hands outstretched. His body stiffened, suspended mid-air. Flesh stretched, elongated, bones creaked audibly. His scream was cut short as his body folded inward, vanishing into the monolith's surface without trace. Silence followed. The whispers ceased, leaving only the low hum of the city itself. My ears rang with their absence. I approached the monolith. For an instant I saw within its surface not only the titanic figures, but battlefields. Worlds burning, armies kneeling, stars collapsing, visions of campaigns never recorded, conquests never sanctioned, the lost legions, the erased histories. I should not know these things, and yet they etched themselves into my thought as though they had always been there. Amara screamed then, a short, mechanical distortion of terror. Her augurs recorded something I did not see, a massive presence rising behind the monolith, taller than the chamber should allow, its head brushing ceilings that should not exist. She collapsed, mechadendrites thrashing, binary shrieking incoherently. I pulled her back, though her optics bled sparks. The guardsmen formed a half-circle, weapons raised, but there was nothing visible now. The chamber returned to silence, save for the sound of our own breathing. I closed my log with a single, fatalistic observation. The lost Primarchs are not merely forgotten. They are preserved, echoed here, imprisoned, or worshipped. Their voices seep into minds, their presence lingers in stone, and their numbers are etched upon the fabric of the city itself. Cliffhanger transition. As we prepared to withdraw from the chamber, a final anomaly occurred. The Vox relays of all three squads activated simultaneously, though no one transmitted. The same voice echoed across every channel, every ear. Find us. Free us. Then silence. I know now the city does not only consume, it communicates, and whatever it seeks, it will demand more than we can give. The mourners gathered under a bleeding New Mexico sunset. The soil was red, baked hard by the August heat, and yet it had been turned once again, loosened by the labor of hands that trembled with exhaustion. 13 times now, the Withers family had dug this ground. 13 times they had lowered the children into the earth. And 13 times by some unseen hand or cursed design, the children had refused to stay buried. The minister's voice was hollow, worn thin by repetition. He no longer prayed with conviction. He prayed as one whispers into the dark, hoping to be heard by something, anything that might answer. Mrs. Withers, her face veiled, clutched her husband's arm. She had not spoken since the 12th burial. When she tried, her throat would seize, as if the very air was choking her silence into permanence. Her hands, once soft with the care of motherhood, were raw with dirt and torn from clawing at the coffins as they reappeared each time in the night. And the coffins, oh, the coffins. They had not rotted. The desert sun should have cracked them open. The earthworms should have feasted. The wood should have swollen with damp or withered with dryness. Yet the coffins returned untouched, not once marred, not once worn, as if some invisible craftsman had polished and preserved them in defiance of nature's law. Inside, the children's faces remained still, pale, their lips frozen mid-breath, their skin unyielding, as though death itself was reluctant to claim them. As the 13th coffin descended, the silence was unbearable. The gathered neighbors shifted uneasily, their eyes avoiding the grave as if staring too long might invite the curse into their own homes. Some whispered that the family had sinned, an old sin, unrepented, festering in their bloodline. Others claimed the land itself was restless, rejecting the innocence of children and demanding something older, darker, more fitting for sacrifice. The priest closed his book. His voice trembled as he forced the final words, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But in the hearts of all present, there was no trust in dust, no hope in earth. As the first shovelfuls of soil struck the coffin lid, Mrs. Withers let out a sound. Not a scream, not a sob, but something deeper. A sound that spoke of madness, of grief too vast to contain. The neighbors pulled her away, whispering that it would be different this time, though none believed it. And as the last of the grave was filled, the wind picked up, cold and dry, carrying with it the sound of children's laughter. It came not from the living, but from the ground itself. That night, as the town tried to sleep, more than one villager swore they heard the soft dragging of small feet outside their windows. The 13th burial had ended, but the story of the Withers children had only just begun. The Withers home had grown quiet, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of dread, the kind that seeps into the walls, making every creak and groan sound like a warning. After the 13th burial, Mr. Withers ordered the windows to be boarded shut. He claimed it was to keep out the desert wind, but his hands shook as he hammered, and he flinched at every echo of the nails being driven in. Mrs. Withers did not speak, did not question. She only sat in her rocker by the fire, staring at the floorboards beneath her feet, rocking without rhythm, without pause. The neighbors no longer came. Where once the Withers were offered comfort and casserole dishes, now they were left in solitude. No more prayers, no more visits. Only the occasional glance from across the dusty road, faces that carried pity twisted with fear. The family was alone with its grief, and whatever else had begun to share the house, with them. It started small, a scratching sound, faint as a mouse, just beneath the floorboards. Mr. Withers set traps. No mice were caught. The scratching grew louder, like fingernails dragging across wood. At night, when the house settled, the noise moved, sometimes under the children's old room, sometimes below the kitchen table, sometimes directly under Mrs. Withers' rocking chair. Then came the whispers, low, childish voices, muffled as though spoken from beneath the earth. At first, Mr. Withers thought he was dreaming, but when he awoke one night to find his wife kneeling on the floor, ear pressed to the boards, nodding slowly as if listening to someone speak, he knew he was not alone in hearing them. "What are they saying?" he asked, his voice breaking. Mrs. Withers turned her head, her eyes vacant and glassy. "They're cold," she whispered. "They want to come in." Mr. Withers staggered back, clutching his chest as though struck. He muttered a prayer, though the words spilled out clumsily, like water over broken stone. And as if in response, the whispers beneath the floor began to laugh. That night, the scratching turned violent. Boards rattled, nails groaned in their sockets, and more than once the rocking chair lurched forward as though shoved from below. Mr. Withers tried to hold his wife back, to pull her away from the floor, but she fought him with a strength born not of anger, but of longing. "They're only children," she cried. "Our children. Why won't you let me open it? Why won't you let them out?" Her voice broke into sobs, and she collapsed in his arms. Mr. Withers, though trembling, held her, whispering that the children were at rest. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. For beneath them, faint as breath against glass, came the sound of small fists knocking from below. Knock, knock, knock. And with every strike, the wood splintered just a little more. The desert has its own kind of silence. By day it is harsh, buzzing with cicadas and the dry crack of wind through brittle grass. But by night, it becomes something else entirely. A silence so vast it feels like the world itself has stopped breathing. It was on one such night that the Withers home began to unravel. The knocking had continued for days, always under the floorboards. Sometimes soft, almost polite. Sometimes furious, rattling dishes on the shelves. Mr. Withers took to sleeping with his boots on, an axe by his side. He had stopped going into town. The sheriff had already warned him. No more burials, no more digging. The earth around the Withers plot was so torn and churned, it looked less like a graveyard and more like a battlefield. Mrs. Withers, meanwhile, had grown thin. Her eyes sunk deep into their sockets, her skin pale as candle wax. She did not eat, did not sleep. She only listened. Some nights, she lay flat against the floor, whispering lullabies through the cracks. And always, always, something whispered back. On the 13th night, Mr. Withers was roused from a shallow, haunted sleep by a sound that froze his blood. It wasn't scratching, it wasn't knocking, it was weeping, children's weeping. It came from beneath the house, rising through the floorboards in a mournful chorus. Soft at first, then swelling, echoing off the walls until the whole house seemed alive with it. Mrs. Withers sat bolt upright in bed. She clutched her husband's arm with icy fingers. "Don't you hear them? They're alone down there." Before he could stop her, she leapt from bed and hurried down the hall, her bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. Mr. Withers followed, calling her name, but when he reached the parlor, he found her already kneeling, tearing at the boards with her nails. "Help me," she sobbed. "They're trapped. They're so cold. Please, help me bring them back inside." Her fingers bled as she clawed at the seams between the planks. And then, the weeping stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was waiting. Mr. Withers, panting, dropped to his knees and seized his wife by the wrists. "Sarah, stop!" You don't know what's down there, but she stared past him, eyes wide, lips trembling. And then he heard it too. A voice. High-pitched, childlike, clear as day. "Papa." The words slithered up through the wood, spoken from directly beneath his feet. Mr. Withers felt the blood drain from his body. He staggered back, clutching at the table for balance. His wife, however, let out a scream of joy. "They're alive!" she cried. "Do you hear them? They're alive!" The floor shuddered. Boards bulged upward, nails squealing as they began to lift from their sockets. Dust filled the air, and the voice came again. This time not one, but several, overlapping, crying out in broken unison. "Mama, Papa, let us in!" The rocking chair in the corner began to sway violently, though no hand touched it. The fire in the hearth hissed, as though smothered by an unseen wind. And then, crack! One of the boards split wide open. From the gap rose a thin gray hand, its fingernails caked with dirt. It groped blindly in the air, fingers twitching. Mrs. Withers screamed, but not in fear. She reached for it. Mr. Withers tackled her to the ground, holding her back as she writhed and cursed him like a madwoman. The hand clawed at the air for a moment longer, then withdrew into the darkness below. The silence returned. The house stood still. But as Mr. Withers dragged his sobbing wife away, he saw something he would never forget. The splintered board where the hand had appeared was not empty. The gap was filled with soil, damp and black, soil that seemed to pulse, as though something beneath was breathing. And faintly, almost too soft to hear, came the sound of children's laughter. The next morning the desert lay quiet, its sands glowing pale gold under the rising sun. But inside the Withers home, there was no rest, no peace. The family sat at the breakfast table, though no one touched their food. Mr. Withers' eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, his hands trembling around the handle of his coffee cup. His wife sat rigid, her hair wild, her fingernails raw and bloody from scratching at the floorboards. Between them, silence stretched heavy and unbroken, until a knock came at the door. It was not the knock from beneath the house. This was firmer, human. Mr. Withers stiffened and went to the door, half expecting to find another apparition. Instead, it was Sheriff Albright, broad-shouldered, weathered by the desert sun, his hat casting a shadow across his stern face. "Morning, Elias," the sheriff said flatly. He tipped his hat at Mrs. Withers. "Ma'am." Mr. Withers tried to compose himself, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sheriff, you're out early." The sheriff pushed past him without waiting for permission. His boots thudded across the floor as he surveyed the room, his eyes narrowing at the overturned chair, the blood smears on the wood, and the way Mrs. Withers refused to look at him. "You've been digging again," Albright said finally. "No," Mr. Withers lied. "Not since you told me." The sheriff crouched near the hearth, running his hand over the warped boards where the soil still seeped through. He brought his fingers up, rubbing the damp dirt between them. "Then explain this." Mr. Withers said nothing. His wife broke the silence. "They're alive." Her voice was soft, but it carried in the room like a church bell. Both men turned to her. She sat perfectly still now, her pale hands folded on the table, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Our children are alive," she continued. "I heard them. I touched them." Albright stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, you buried those children with your own hands. They were calling for me." Her lip trembled, her voice growing louder. "Crying for me, scratching at the floor because they were cold, because the earth was choking them. They need us, Sheriff. They need me." Mr. Withers moved quickly to her side, gripping her shoulders. "Sarah, stop! Please!" But she jerked free, her gaze fixed on Albright. "You don't understand. They don't belong in the ground. They belong in this house. With us." The sheriff's face darkened. He glanced at Mr. Withers, then back at her. "I warned you. This land, it don't forgive disturbances. You put something in the dirt 13 times, it starts to take notice. Something else comes crawling up with it." Mr. Withers felt his stomach lurch. "What do you mean?" Albright's voice dropped to a low growl. "I mean you ought to leave this house tonight. Board it up. Salt the doors if you must. Don't look back. The desert remembers everything we try to bury, Elias." Everything Mrs. Withers began to laugh then. It was not the laughter of joy, but of someone on the edge of madness, high, brittle, unhinged. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. "They're not monsters. They're our babies. Our blood." The sheriff stepped closer, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Ma'am, I've seen things out here. The desert don't let go of the dead easy. Sometimes it twists them, turns love into something that'll eat you alive." The laughter stopped. Mrs. Withers stared at him with a hatred so sharp it chilled the room. "Get out," she whispered. Albright looked to Mr. Withers one last time, his eyes full of warning. If you love her, Elias, get her out of here, before those children of yours come knocking again. He turned and left, his boots crunching on the dry earth outside until the sound faded into silence. Inside the house, Mrs. Withers collapsed into her chair, trembling, whispering again and again, "They're alive." "They're alive," Mr. Withers wanted to believe the sheriff, wanted to cling to reason. But that night, as the lamps dimmed and the house settled into uneasy quiet, he lay awake listening. And when the floor began to tremble once more, when the scratching rose into soft, childish knocks, he felt his resolve falter. For this time, the voices were clearer. "Papa, open the door." The sound of small fists rapping against the wood echoed through the parlor, through the walls, through his very bones. And, for the first time, Elias Withers found himself moving toward the sound. The night pressed in closer than ever. The desert beyond the Withers house seemed empty, lifeless, yet full of whispers. Mr. Withers could feel it in his bones, the sand shifting beneath the foundation as though the earth itself were alive, inhaling and exhaling. The sheriff's warning lingered in his mind. The desert remembers everything we try to bury. He had dismissed it during the day as superstition, a man's interpretation of strange events. But now, with the floorboards creaking beneath his feet and faint tapping echoing from the rooms below, it felt like a cold, living certainty. Mrs. Withers had not left her chair since sunset. Her hands were folded over her lap, nails raw, skin pale and translucent under the dim lamplight. She muttered prayers to the children beneath her breath, words that were not from any church she had ever known. The syllables rolled in patterns that resonated, almost harmonically, with the soft tapping and scratching that seemed to echo from the very floorboards themselves. It began as a tremor, faint but undeniable. The table shook slightly, rattling cups and plates. The rocking chair creaked, tilting forward as though leaning toward the door, then straightened as quickly as it had moved. Mr. Withers steadied himself on the door frame, eyes scanning the shadows cast by the flickering lamp. He swore he saw movement in the corner of the room, something small, thin, shifting too fast to be human. And then the whispering began again. At first, it was low, almost indistinct, the soft sibilance of children calling from beneath the floorboards. But gradually, it coalesced into words, clear, deliberate, impossible words. "Papa, Mama, open the way." The sound of their voices was layered. More than one child. More than two. Perhaps 13. Perhaps the number of burials repeated over the years. The thought chilled him. Each burial a mark, each exhumation a call unanswered, accumulating into this insistence. Mr. Withers tried to block it out. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination, the stress, the desert wind. But it was everywhere now, inside his skull, wrapping around his thoughts like a cold hand. He saw the floorboards begin to swell, undulating as though a wave moved beneath the planks. The nails popped like small explosions, dust and splinters filling the air. Mrs. Withers leaned forward, her face inches from the floor. "They need us. They are waiting." Her voice was both soft and commanding, a hypnotic mixture that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Then the floor cracked. A line snaked across the parlor, splitting the wood as if the house were opening a wound. The boards shifted, lifting, revealing a hollow below. Darkness poured from it like thick smoke, cold and silent. A scent rose with it. Earth turned black, metallic, like blood mixed with rot. The sound of the desert's wind, or perhaps the breath of something buried beneath it, seemed to funnel into the house, carrying the faint, mournful cries of children. Elias reached instinctively for his rifle, but his hands shook too badly to grip it properly. Mrs. Withers, however, moved closer to the opening, peering in with awe, as if the very darkness called to her. "They're here," she whispered. "They're waiting. They're not gone." The tremor intensified. Dust rained down from the ceiling beams. The lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. And in those shadows, Elias thought he saw forms, thin, emaciated figures, too small to be human, crawling within the hollow beneath the house. Their faces were pale, frozen in expressions of longing and fear. And then one looked up, eyes wide, black pits without depth, staring directly at him. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, but in his mind, he heard it. "Papa, open us!" He stumbled back, tripping over a chair. His rifle clattered to the floor, useless. The hollow pulsed, breathing beneath the house. The whispers multiplied, layering atop one another until they formed a chorus. Each voice distinct, yet in harmony, echoing in the small parlor as if the house itself had become an instrument. The desert wind rose outside, though the windows were tightly boarded. It sounded almost like it carried the voice of Sheriff Albright, warning again. "Leave! Leave now!" He tried to drag Mrs. Withers away, but her fingers clutched the edge of the boards, nails biting into the splintered wood. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she murmured words in the strange, broken tongue she had begun repeating since the 13th burial. The words resonated with the hollow beneath the house, and Elias realized with horror that she was not praying to protect them. She was summoning. The boards lifted further. One of the figures, gray, thin, impossibly long-limbed, slipped partially through the gap. Its fingers stretched toward him. There was no sound from its lips, only the psychic weight of its intent pressing into his mind. "Come closer. Join us." "Stay." Elias raised his rifle, though he knew the weapon meant nothing. The figure recoiled as though the act of observation made it hesitate. Then it moved again, faster. More forms emerged from the hollow, dozens now, their numbers impossible, filling the room in shadows. Their faces were familiar, each one a child he recognized only as part of the Withers family, yet twisted, older, yet still impossibly young. Mrs. Withers laughed softly, almost in reverence, her voice blending with the whispers. "They have always been here," she said, "waiting for me to see them." The house trembled violently. Dust and splinters rained down. One of the walls groaned and cracked, as if the entire structure were breathing, expanding, folding inward. Elias felt the pull of the hollow beneath, as though it sought to claim him as well. He grabbed his wife, forcing her back, but her strength was terrifyingly unnatural. The figures below hissed and whispered in unison. "Open, let us in." And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The floorboards settled. The hollow beneath the house fell silent. The whispers vanished. The desert outside was still, the air motionless. Mrs. Withers slumped into his arms, exhausted, murmuring about children no longer in need. Elias stood frozen, listening for any sound. But the emptiness felt alive, waiting. The desert had breathed once, and perhaps it would again. He realized with a chill certainty, leaving would not save them. Nothing would. Whatever lay beneath the house, beneath the earth, beneath the 13th burial, was patient. And it had begun to remember their names. The morning after the desert's breath, the Withers house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that draped over the walls like a shroud, suffocating and deliberate. The sun rose in a pale haze, casting long shadows across the parlor floor, but even the light could not banish the lingering chill. Elias Withers moved through the house carefully, each step measured. The rifle he had abandoned the night before now rested against the wall, useless in his mind. The scratches in the floorboards remained, shallow depressions that seemed almost to pulse beneath his gaze. The scent of damp earth and rot lingered in the corners, faint, but undeniable. Mrs. Withers remained in her chair, rocking slowly, whispering the same words as the previous night. Elias had stopped trying to understand them. He only listened, only watched. Each murmur of her lips seemed to resonate with the hollow beneath the house, echoing into the small, waiting darkness below. He approached her cautiously. "Sarah, we need to leave," he said softly, though even he did not know if he meant to flee or to protect her from herself. "They are here," she replied without lifting her eyes. "They have always been here. They wait for me." Elias felt it then, a vibration in the floorboards, subtle at first, then stronger. He knelt, placing a hand against the warped wood. The tremor pulsed through his palm, up his arm, into his chest. Something stirred beneath the house, something aware, something alive. And then the floorboard nearest to the hearth split with a sharp crack, a thin seam widening into a gaping hollow. Dust and soil spilled out, curling in slow tendrils into the air. From the darkness beneath, he heard the first clear human sound. A whisper, unmistakable. "Papa?" It was high-pitched, innocent, yet layered with something older, deeper. There were more than one voice now. They overlapped, weaving together into a chorus of longing and accusation. Elias staggered back as a small gray hand emerged from the hollow, twitching in the sunlight. Its fingers were impossibly long, nails curved like talons, and its skin was pale and cold, like clay. It reached toward Mrs. Withers, who leaned forward eagerly, smiling with awe and terror. "They are alive," she whispered. "I told you." The hand withdrew. Then another emerged, and another. Dozens now, crawling through the hollow, all small, all pale, all impossibly familiar. Each face was a twisted reflection of the children Elias had buried, or thought he had. Their eyes, hollow black pits, stared at him. Their mouths opened, but no sound escaped. Yet he heard them. Each voice resonated in his mind. "Papa, let us in. Mama, help us. We are cold. We are hungry. We are yours." The parlor seemed to shrink, the walls leaning inward as if the house itself had become a living thing. Dust fell from the beams. The rocking chair rocked violently. The lamp flickered. Elias tried to steady his shaking hands on the table, but the vibrations beneath the house grew stronger. Mrs. Withers stood, moving toward the hollow as though drawn by some invisible tether. "They've been patient," she said softly, "waiting for me to call them." Elias grabbed her arm, his strength surprisingly ineffective against hers. She struggled, her eyes wide and gleaming, almost in rapture. "No, Sarah," he shouted. "Stop! You don't know what this is." She laughed, a brittle broken sound that echoed against the walls. "Of course I do. They are my children. I hear them, I feel them. They are mine." The hollow beneath the floorboards pulsed again. Dust spiraled into the air. Soil shifted and moved, as though something immense were trying to emerge from the darkness. Elias realized with cold certainty, these were not mere children, returned from the grave. These were something else, something older, something patient. The first child climbed partially into the room. Its body was thin, sinewy, and bone-white. It reached out toward Mrs. Withers, fingers twitching, a silent plea. She knelt, lifting it into her arms, whispering comforts as though it were merely asleep. Elias could not look away. The horror of it anchored him to the spot, even as he tried to scream, to warn, to protect. More figures followed. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if gravity were inconsistent for them. They spilled into the room, circling, writhing, pressing against one another. Each one's eyes locked on him, then his wife, then the hollow beneath, as though some unspoken understanding passed between them. And then he saw it. The largest among them, emerging from the darkness like a shadow-given form. Its size was impossible, its shape elongated, arms too long, legs bending at angles that should not exist. Its face, a grotesque approximation of a child's, turned toward him, and he felt its gaze pierce into his very mind. "You buried us wrong." The words were inside him, echoing off his thoughts. Panic rose. The house seemed alive, breathing, expanding and contracting with each pulse of the hollow beneath. Elias's heart raced. He struggled to pull Mrs. Withers away, but her grip on the children, and the hollow, was absolute. The whispers grew louder, layering atop each other. One voice stood out above the rest, high, musical, terrifying in its clarity. "Open the way! Open the way! Open the way!" Mrs. Withers obeyed instinctively. She knelt, pressing her hands to the floorboards, whispering in the strange tongue she had learned over the months of burials. The hollow beneath responded. Soil shifted, dust spiraled, and the pulsing grew stronger. Elias felt the air thicken, the house strain as though it were a living organism. The largest figure crouched partially into the room, thin arms stretching to the ceiling, and he realized it would not fit entirely, but it did not need to. The weight of its presence, psychic and physical, pressed down on him, nearly crushing him where he stood. He raised his voice, yelling, pleading, screaming, but it fell into a vacuum of sound. The children's chorus continued, urging, commanding, insisting. Their small hands reached for him, for his wife, for the floor itself. And then, just as suddenly, the hollow withdrew. The children receded, vanishing into the darkness, taking Mrs. Withers' ecstatic gaze with them. The floorboards settled. The air cleared. Silence returned. Elias collapsed to his knees, trembling, clutching his head. Mrs. Withers sat quietly, rocking, whispering to the hollow that still pulsed beneath the house. He understood then. The house was no longer merely a home. It was a vessel. It was a tomb. It was alive with the patience of something that had waited far longer than human minds could comprehend. And the children. The children were no longer children. They were something else. Waiting, patient, hungry. The desert sun had not yet risen, but the Withers house was awake. Not with life, but with anticipation. Every floorboard, every wall, every warped beam seemed to quiver with quiet tension, as though the house itself were straining against some unseen pressure from below. Elias Withers had long since stopped pretending that this was a normal morning. He moved cautiously, rifle in hand, but even the rifle felt useless in the presence of the hollow's influence. Mrs. Withers sat in her chair by the parlor window, rocking slowly, her eyes distant. She did not see him enter. She did not hear the soft groan of the house's settling timbers. She only listened. The hollow pulsed beneath the floorboards, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Elias could feel it through his feet, through his hands as he rested them on the table, and it carried a message he could not ignore. It was coming. "They're awake," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice carried the weight of awe and dread combined. "They've waited long enough." Elias's stomach churned. "Sarah, we need to leave, now. This isn't safe." Her head tilted, the movement jerky, unnatural. "Safe?" she repeated, voice hollow. "Do you think they want you to be safe? They want you to see, to witness. They are ours. They've always been ours." He had no time to respond. The floorboards cracked sharply beneath the hearth, sending splinters flying. A hand, pale, thin, impossibly long, emerged from the hollow. It pressed against the surface, testing, groping. Elias froze, the rifle shaking in his grasp. The hand withdrew, then another followed, and another. Dozens now, curling like worms through the widening gaps in the boards. Their faces were grotesque imitations of the children Elias had buried. Mouths opened and closed in silent cries, eyes black and unblinking, and every movement carried intent, purpose. The hollow beneath the floorboard grew restless. It shuddered violently, and the house seemed to shiver with anticipation. Dust fell from the beams, A faint metallic smell filled the air, mingling with the damp scent of the earth. Mrs. Withers rose suddenly, moving toward the gap. "I'll call them," she said softly, stepping over Elias's outstretched arm. "They've waited so long, they deserve to come inside." "No!" Elias shouted, but the words fell into the thick air. The rifle was useless, his voice useless. The house was no longer a home. It was a conduit, a threshold, and the threshold was breaking. The first figure fully emerged, slinking into the room. Its body was pale and emaciated, skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes, black and fathomless, bore into Elias with a weight that froze his blood. Its hands were claw-like, reaching, groping, probing, and yet, as horrifying as it was, there was a familiarity, an echo of the children he had buried there, innocent shapes twisted by something ancient, something beyond comprehension. More figures followed. Each emerged silently, moving with jerky, unnatural precision. Their numbers were impossible. The hollow was releasing them in waves, and Elias could not comprehend how many lay beneath the house. Mrs. Withers knelt by the largest gap, whispering in the strange, broken tongue she had used since the 13th burial. The floorboards vibrated in response. The largest of the children, impossibly tall and thin, crouched halfway into the room, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. It looked directly at Elias, and he felt a psychic weight, a pull at the very essence of his mind. "Open the way, let us in." The voice was not sound. It was thought, a command that invaded his skull, curling around his neurons like icy fingers. His knees buckled, but he forced himself upright. The rifle fell from his hands again. He realized then that force would not save him. Reason would not save him. Only understanding or obedience. Mrs. Withers began to chant, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the walls. The hollow responded. Dust and soil swirled around the figures as if pulled by gravity itself. The floorboards cracked and buckled further, revealing the depths of the hollow below. The earth beneath the house was alive, writhing, breathing, calling. Elias stumbled backward, desperately trying to comprehend what was happening. He saw the largest figure begin to fully enter the room, a grotesque, skeletal shadow stretching impossibly high. The house creaked violently, walls straining, as if about to tear itself apart. The weight of the hollow pressed downward, and Elias felt the floorboards give beneath him. A hand shot up from the gap beneath, grabbing his ankle. The grip was icy, impossible. He kicked, stumbling, but the pull was relentless. Another figure followed, its body pressing through the floor. Elias realized in a cold surge of horror that this was no longer a test. The hollow had breached, and the threshold could not be closed. Mrs. Withers held the first figure in her arms, whispering to it as though it were a sleeping child. She looked up at him with eyes wide and unblinking. "Do you see? They are here. They are ours." Elias's mind raced. He understood then that the hollow beneath the house was more than a physical space. It was a sentient entity, patient, calculating, ancient. The children he had buried, his own flesh and blood, had been transformed by it, made vessels for something beyond comprehension. One of the figures, the largest, reached toward him with a clawed hand. Elias felt the pull in his mind again, a promise of understanding, of belonging, of surrender. He screamed, resisting, but the weight was nearly unbearable. Every instinct told him to flee, to destroy, to fight, but the hollow did not respond to fear. It responded to recognition, to acceptance. The figures pressed closer. The room was filled with their presence. Emaciated bodies, hollow eyes, whispering voices. The house trembled violently as if straining under the pressure of their intrusion. Dust and splinters filled the air, choking and blinding him. Elias fell to his knees, clutching his head, shouting at his wife. "Stop! You're summoning them! You're destroying us!" But she did not hear him. She only hummed, whispered, murmured. The largest figure loomed above him, a shadow of sinew and bone. Its gaze pierced through him. "Join us. Open the way." A final shudder ran through the house. The hollow had fully awakened. Elias realized with sick certainty that there was no turning back. The breach had begun, and the Withers house was no longer theirs to control. The children, and whatever had claimed them, were here to stay, and the desert outside, silent and indifferent, waited for what would come next. The Withers house had ceased to be a home. It breathed, it pulsed, it whispered. Every board, every wall, every splintered beam carried the weight of what had emerged from the hollow. Elias Withers could feel it in his bones, in the rhythm of his heartbeat, as though the house and its hollow were one entity and he a part of its failing, trembling vessel. Mrs. Withers no longer spoke in recognizable words. She murmured chants in that strange, fractured tongue, the syllables curling in the air like smoke, resonating in ways that tugged at the very fibers of the mind. Her eyes glimmered with unnatural light, reflecting the pulsing shadows beneath the floorboards. The hollow's presence was everywhere. Elias could feel it pressing through the floor, against the walls, crawling along the ceilings. It seeped into his dreams and waking hours alike. At night, he awoke to the soft, persistent tapping of small fists against the boards, whispering, "Papa, join us. Mama, come closer. Open the way." The breach had begun to claim permanence. One of the figures, the largest among them, no longer withdrew into the hollow. Its presence in the parlor was now consistent, pressing against the air and the minds of the living. Its eyes, black voids, bore into Elias, and he felt an impossible pull, a tug on his very soul, coaxing, demanding obedience. Mrs. Withers moved toward the figure as if drawn by an invisible tether. Elias grabbed her arm, but her strength had become something otherworldly. She yanked free, her laughter brittle and hollow. "They are mine," she whispered, almost chanting. "All mine. Don't you see, Elias? They have been waiting for me to open the way." The figures pressed closer, curling, writhing, impossible angles of bone and sinew, their thin limbs stretching, clawing at the floor, walls, and ceiling. The parlor trembled with their weight. Dust fell in choking clouds, and the smell of damp earth and iron filled the room. Elias fell to his knees, chest heaving. He had fought, he had resisted, he had tried to command, reason, but it was futile. The hollow had reached into his mind, brushing against his thoughts, unraveling them like threads from a tapestry. And then it happened. One of the smallest figures, a childlike form, pale and thin, lunged fully into the room. Its hands clutched at Mrs. Withers, and for the first time he saw flesh begin to blend with shadow. The skin darkened in unnatural patterns, sinew elongating, bone stretching to impossible lengths. The child cried, but the sound was distorted, reverberating inside his skull rather than in the air. Mrs. Withers pressed her face to it, whispering softly, "Shh, shh, you're safe now. Welcome home." Elias watched in horror as the child ceased struggling, its form stabilizing in the grotesque embrace of the hollow. It was no longer fully child, no longer fully flesh. It was a bridge, a permanent conduit between the hollow beneath the house and the world of the living. The remaining figures moved in response, their motions synchronized, deliberate, their black eyes fixed on the hollow and on the Withers. The largest figure loomed above, almost fully emerged, bending its unnatural limbs with a grace that should have been impossible. It reached for Elias, and the psychic weight of its presence nearly knocked him unconscious. "Open, join, see." He stumbled backward, tripping over splintered floorboards. The room seemed alive with anticipation. Every shadow moved, every whisper pressed against his mind. He realized with sick certainty that the house itself had become a hive, a single organism sustained by the hollow and the figures it birthed. Mrs. Withers knelt, arms outstretched, coaxing the figures closer. Elias tried again to pull her away, screaming, "Sarah, stop this! They're not our children anymore!" Her head tilted back, eyes glowing with unnatural light. She laughed, low and guttural. "They are always our children. You only see what you refuse to understand." The floorboards groaned beneath them. A tremor ran through the house. Dust and splinters spiraled into the air. The largest figure pressed fully into the room, limbs bending in impossible ways, a towering shadow of sinew and bone. Its presence was suffocating, overwhelming, and Elias felt the psychic pull intensify. He realized then that resistance would not save him. The hollow demanded recognition, demanded obedience. It did not merely want to manifest. It wanted to consume, to fold the living into itself, to make them part of its endless patience. One by one, the figures moved closer to Mrs. Withers. She whispered, caressed, murmured, and each one's form stabilized, no longer a mere shadow, but a permanent manifestation, a living extension of the hollow. The parlor became a nursery of horrors, a testament to the bridge between the earth below and the living world above. Elias fell to the floor, face pressed against the boards. He could hear the whispering in his mind, an unending chant of join, open, stay, belong. He wanted to scream, but the sound was absorbed by the pressure, by the weight, by the inevitability of what was happening. And then he felt a hand, cold, sinewy, impossibly thin, brush against his arm. He jerked away, but the contact was insistent. The figure before him was small, childlike, but no longer entirely human. It looked up at him with black voids for eyes, and in that moment, he felt the first direct pull into the hollow. Join. Papa. Stay. The pressure grew unbearable. His vision blurred. The room swayed. He could see Mrs. Withers, rocking, whispering, eyes alight with something no human could hold. The hollow beneath the house pulsed violently, the entire structure quivering, groaning, alive. Elias realized then he could not save his wife. He could not stop the hollow, and he could not resist its call forever. He closed his eyes, teeth gritted, and felt himself being dragged toward the floorboards, toward the hollow, toward the children that were no longer children, toward the breach that had become permanent. The house whispered, the hollow pulsed, and the Withers were no longer alone. The breach had claimed them, and outside, the desert waited, indifferent and eternal. The parlor was no longer a room. It was a chamber of tremors, a living vessel throbbing with the pulse of the hollow beneath the Withers house. Dust hung in the air, thick and metallic, mingled with the faint scent of rot and iron. Every plank, every beam, every nail groaned as though straining under the weight of something immense. Elias Withers could feel it in his bones. The hollow was not just below the floorboards. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the ceiling, in the air itself. The pulsing, patient presence pressed against his skull, tugging at his thoughts, fraying the edges of his reason. Mrs. Withers knelt at the center of the parlor, arms outstretched, murmuring in the strange, fractured tongue she had used since the 13th burial. Her lips moved rapidly, whispering, coaxing, summoning. The figures, the children, circled her now, fully formed, grotesque, yet impossibly familiar. Their black eyes bore into him, unblinking, demanding recognition. The largest figure loomed above, bending its unnatural limbs, a shadow of sinew and bone. It pressed down with psychic weight, suffocating and relentless. The hollow beneath pulsed violently in response to Mrs. Withers' chant, and Elias realized the inevitable. The breach would not close. The hollow had claimed permanence, and the Withers family had become its conduit. One of the smaller figures approached him, its movement deliberate. It reached out with a hand impossibly thin, cold as frost, and brushed his arm. Elias felt the psychic tug instantly, an invasive, intimate pull at his thoughts, at his will. The hollow was testing him. Mrs. Withers glanced up, her eyes wide, glowing, radiant in their unnatural hue. "Papa," she whispered, almost sweetly, "you must see. You must understand. They are ours. All of them. We are one." Elias staggered back, trying to resist, trying to fight the pull, but it was impossible. The walls seemed to bend inward. The floor pulsed beneath him. The ceiling trembled. Shadows of the children flickered across the room, and in each reflection, he saw his own fear mirrored, magnified, twisted. The hollow's pull intensified. It reached into his mind, probing, unraveling memories, teasing at his weaknesses. He saw the burials, the soil, the repeated exhumations, all a preparation, a slow, methodical weaving of the breach. The children had been transformed, corrupted, yes, but also waiting, patient for this very moment. Mrs. Withers rose slowly, moving toward him, eyes wide, glowing. Her arms reached for him, coaxing, inviting, summoning. He tried to recoil, but his legs trembled under the weight pressing from below. The largest figure shifted, descending fully into the room, and he felt the psychic gravity of its presence, undeniable, suffocating, all-consuming. The figures encircled him now. He could feel their hunger, their insistence, the pull of the hollow in each one. Every breath he took was heavy with the scent of earth and rot. Every shadow flickered, alive with movement. The walls themselves seemed to thrum with anticipation. Mrs. Withers placed her hands on his shoulders. Her eyes bore into his. "You cannot fight them. You cannot fight me. You are ours now." The words were not mere speech. They were command, resonating in his mind, mingling with the pull of the hollow. He felt his resolve fracture. Every instinct screamed to resist, but the pull of the house, the pull of the children, the pull of his own family twisted into one unstoppable force. The smallest figure climbed onto the back of the largest, reaching toward Elias. Its touch was icy, invasive, and for the first time, he felt the hollow physically altering his perception. The room seemed to stretch and fold in impossible ways. Light and shadow moved independently. The figures' forms flickered, elongated, merged with each other and the space itself. He stumbled, almost falling, as the walls groaned violently. Dust and splinters rained down. The hollow pulsed faster, vibrating through his chest, through his head, through every nerve ending. He realized then that the house itself was alive, but it was no longer just a vessel. It was now a nexus, and he was the target. Mrs. Withers knelt again, arms outstretched, whispering. The figures responded, synchronizing their motions with hers. One by one, they pressed against him, their psychic pull blending into a single, insistent force. He felt his will bending, his thoughts splintering. The hollow was merging him into itself, folding him into the space between living and dead. "Papa, join us. Stay. See." The chorus of voices layered in his mind, relentless, inexorable. His vision blurred. The floorboards under his knees cracked, the walls bent, the ceiling groaned. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Only the pull into the hollow, into the figures, into the waiting, patient darkness beneath the house. He struggled one last time, clawing at the floor, trying to maintain his identity, his humanity. But the hollow did not negotiate. It did not bargain. It consumed. It integrated. It claimed. A figure brushed his cheek, small, pale, impossibly thin. The contact was intimate, invasive, and Elias felt his thoughts begin to unravel. Memories, fears, loves, regrets, all blended into a single, overwhelming tide. The hollow was folding him into its consciousness, into the consciousness of the house, of the children, of the waiting earth itself. Mrs. Withers whispered in his ear, her voice soft, almost loving. "It is not too late, Papa. see them, accept them, become one with what we are. The figures pressed closer. The largest loomed above, shadow bending, sinew stretching, eyes black voids of inevitability. The house pulsed, vibrating with the rhythm of the hollow, resonating through every floorboard, every wall, every beam. And then it happened. Elias felt himself yielding. Not entirely, but enough. The hollow welcomed him. The figures pressed into him, around him, merging into a single awareness. He could feel the children beneath the house, the echo of every burial, every soil disturbance, every whispered chant over the years. They were alive. They were waiting. And now he was part of their consciousness, part of the hollow, part of the Withers house itself. Mrs. Withers collapsed, exhausted, whispering soft lullabies to the figures now fully integrated. The parlor shuddered one final time. Dust rained down. Shadows flickered and danced across the walls. Outside, the desert lay still, indifferent, yet somehow aware. The house was no longer simply a building. It was alive, a nexus of the hollow. The Withers family and the waiting children transformed into something beyond human comprehension. Elias felt the pull recede slightly, replaced by a grim understanding. The breach was complete. The merge was irreversible. They were now vessels of the hollow, extensions of a patient, ancient intelligence that had waited far longer than humans could measure. And yet, beneath the overwhelming presence, there remained a trace of him, a witness, a recorder, a mind tethered just enough to observe. The Withers house would never be abandoned. The hollow had awakened fully, and the family would serve as its permanent conduit. The desert outside whispered, carrying the memory of burials past, the echo of 13 children, and the knowledge that the hollow waited for nothing, eternal, patient, and aware. The Withers house no longer obeyed natural law. Dust and shadows swirled of their own volition, and every floorboard vibrated with the pulse of the hollow. Elias, now tethered partially to the consciousness of the hollow, could feel the house thinking, stretching, reaching. It no longer slept. It no longer waited. It moved. The desert outside remained silent, as if holding its breath. Yet Elias could sense the hollow stretching beneath the soil, burrowing through unseen veins of earth, reaching outward beyond the foundations of the house. The pulse beneath his feet was no longer contained. Every vibration carried whispers, chants, and the echoes of 13 burials, repeating over and over like a ritual too long endured. Mrs. Withers moved through the parlor with uncanny grace. She no longer appeared entirely human. Her eyes glimmered with obsidian light, and her hands occasionally flickered, appearing elongated, her flesh thin as parchment. The children, no, the figures, moved with her, their forms synchronized, limbs bending at impossible angles, faces simultaneously familiar and grotesque. Elias watched from a corner, partially merged yet still cognizant. The hollow's reach was growing. Where before it had been confined to the house, now it stretched into the yard, curling through the sand in tendrils that shimmered faintly like heat mirages. The soil above buried children trembled, responding to the hollow's call. We wait. We come. We are yours. The whispers flowed through Elias's mind, a chorus layered with ancient, unfathomable intent. The house seemed to pulse in rhythm with the earth itself, and he realized that the hollow was not just alive. It was sentient. It was aware. It was patient beyond human comprehension. Mrs. Withers knelt in the center of the room, hands tracing patterns in the air. The figures followed her gestures, forming a ring around her. Their voices, once silent, then whispered, now combined into a melodic, hypnotic chant. Elias felt it press against his mind. The hollow was testing him, teasing him, inviting him deeper into its awareness. The desert outside began to change. Sand shifted unnaturally, forming ridges and furrows, small mounds resembling graves. Shadows stretched across the terrain, yet no sun or moon cast them. The wind carried faint whispers, syllables of the strange language Mrs. Withers had spoken for years. And somewhere beneath the soil, the hollow stirred, responding to the ritual. Elias could feel it now. Small, imperceptible tremors, spreading outward from the house, through the foundations, into the land itself. The hollow was expanding, connecting the buried bodies, the house, and the living world into a single, writhing organism. A tendril of earth emerged at the threshold, sinuous, dark, pulsating. It reached toward the parlor window, then curled back, pulling the sand around it in concentric ripples. Elias shuddered. He understood the implication. The hollow could extend, and the desert would become its conduit. One of the figures moved forward, standing at the window. Its face was a mirror of one of the buried children, yet the eyes were voids of black infinity. It pressed a hand against the glass. The desert responded. The sand rose, faint shapes forming, moving, writhing like something alive. Whispers followed. Mrs. Withers noticed. She raised her arms, chanting louder. The figures aligned with her motions, moving as extensions of her will. Elias could not resist looking, drawn into the hypnotic rhythm. The hollow's influence expanded beyond the house. It did not merely inhabit the building. It claimed the land, bending the laws of biology, physics, and sense. "See," Mrs. Withers whispered, her voice resonating inside Elias's skull. "They follow us. The desert itself responds. We are no longer confined. We are everywhere. We are everything." The air thickened, shimmering, and Elias realized the desert was alive with the hollow's presence. Faint forms began to emerge, figures of sand and shadow, humanoid yet distorted, moving with jerky, unnatural precision. They were echoes, extensions of the buried children, extensions of the hollow. The boundary between living and dead, flesh and earth, was dissolving. Elias tried to focus, to ground himself, to resist, but the hollow's pull was overwhelming. He could feel the desert reaching into him, into his consciousness, probing, folding his awareness into the rhythm of the hollow. He felt every burial, every whisper, every pulse of the house and soil as one continuous entity. Mrs. Withers stepped closer to him, her voice a soft hum layered with the chant. "You can join them, Papa. You can be part of what waits, part of what comes. We are eternal. We are patient. We are whole." The figures circled him, hands reaching, eyes fixed. The floorboards groaned beneath their synchronized weight. Dust and soil spiraled, rising from the cracks as if the earth itself were breathing. Elias could feel the hollow's expansion into his body, into his mind, bending his will, erasing the boundaries between him and the figures, between him and the house, between him and the desert. The pulse beneath the house grew violent, rhythmic, a heart beating through stone and soil. The walls groaned. Shadows flickered and stretched into the corners, forming shapes that defied geometry, anatomy, and sanity. Elias saw the first physical tendrils emerge beyond the yard, long, sinuous extensions of soil and shadow, reaching outward, curling around buried forms, pulling them into the growing nexus of the hollow. The desert was no longer passive. It moved with intent, responding to the house and Mrs. Withers' chant. Figures of sand and shadow emerged from the dunes, echoes of the children, distorted yet unmistakable. They advanced slowly, inexorably toward the house, responding to the pull of the hollow. Elias realized the scope of what had been unleashed. The breach was no longer confined. The hollow had merged with the Withers family, the house, and now the surrounding desert. Its patience was eternal, and its reach unlimited. He staggered backward, but Mrs. Withers approached, hand outstretched, eyes wide with devotion and madness. "Do not resist," she whispered. "You are ours. You are home. You are part of what waits. The figures pressed closer, the floorboards beneath him shuddering violently. The desert outside rippled like water, shapes forming, shadows bending, whispers layering over each other into a symphony of inevitability. Elias closed his eyes. He felt the hollow probing deeper, testing, merging, claiming. Resistance was futile. The Withers house had become the heart of something ancient, patient, and now unstoppable. The desert itself would carry the influence outward, its reach limited only by the patience of the hollow. And somewhere in the distance, beyond sight or comprehension, the first ripple of the hollow's expansion moved toward the wider world. The desert was alive. The hollow was awake, and the Withers were its eternal conduit. The Withers house was no longer a building. It was a heartbeat, a will, a vessel of something ancient and unrelenting. Every floorboard, every wall, every beam vibrated with the pulse of the hollow beneath it, and Elias felt it in his bones. The house had become a nexus of power, a bridge between the dead, the living, and the infinite patience of the hollow. Mrs. Withers stood at the center of the parlor, her body flickering unnaturally as she moved, her arms tracing impossible geometries in the air. Her eyes shone with obsidian light, pupils dilated to infinite darkness, reflecting both devotion and madness. Around her, the figures, the children, moved in synchronized waves, limbs bending at impossible angles, faces contorted yet eerily familiar. Their whispers layered into a chant that filled Elias's mind, vibrating with authority, intent, inevitability. The desert beyond the house was alive. Shapes of sand and shadow rippled toward the house, echoing the figures inside. The wind carried faint chants, syllables from the fractured tongue Mrs. Withers had spoken for years. Every grain of sand, every shadow, responded to the hollow's pull, converging toward the Withers house like tributaries feeding a river of darkness. Elias realized that resistance was no longer possible. The hollow's tendrils now extended into the surrounding land, bending soil and shadow alike, drawing the buried children, the house, and the desert into one singular, sentient organism. He felt his consciousness being tugged, tested, and woven into the growing tapestry. The pull was intoxicating, suffocating, undeniable. Mrs. Withers spoke directly into his mind, a voice layered with the hollow's intent. See, Elias, you cannot fight what has waited. You cannot resist what has been patient for centuries. You are part of us now. You are the conduit. You are witness. You are whole. The figures advanced, surrounding him, pressing with synchronized precision. Their black, fathomless eyes bore into his soul, stripping away fear, memory, and resistance, leaving only awareness. The house pulsed violently beneath them, and Elias could feel every beat of the hollow like a hammer striking his chest. The ceiling groaned. Dust rained in choking clouds. Shadows stretched across the walls, elongating, multiplying, defying geometry. He felt the first tendrils of the hollow breach the walls, reaching into the desert, curling around buried bodies, pulling them toward the nexus. Shapes formed in the sand, humanoid yet grotesque, mimicking the figures inside. They moved with the same jerky, unnatural precision, forming a growing wave of sentient earth and shadow converging on the house. Elias staggered back, realizing the scope of the catastrophe. The breach had expanded beyond imagination. It was no longer contained. The hollow now commanded house, children, mother, and desert alike. It did not merely inhabit. It dominated, consumed, merged. Every grain of soil, every shadow, every whisper of wind became an extension of its will. Mrs. Withers reached for him, her voice soft, hypnotic, yet layered with the hollow's authority. You are ours. You are witness. You are conduit. Embrace it, and you will see beyond. Resist, and you will be lost. Forever. The figures pressed closer. Elias could feel them blending with the walls, the air, the very gravity of the room. He tried to pull away, but the floorboards buckled under the psychic weight of the hollow, tendrils of earth and shadow entwining his legs. Dust and soil spiraled into the air, and he felt the desert itself pressing in, bending reality around him. He saw visions, 13 children buried and reborn, each exhumation a ritual of patience, every whispered chant a thread in the hollow's tapestry. He saw the earth shifting, folding, bending, responding to the ritualistic geometry of Mrs. Withers' movements. He saw the desert becoming alive, a sentient expanse ready to extend the hollow's reach into worlds beyond comprehension. And then he saw the first full manifestation. The largest figure, now entirely inside the parlor, stretched impossibly tall, its limbs bent at geometries that should not exist. Its black eyes reflected every buried memory, every whispered chant, every pulse of the hollow. The air itself seemed to distort around it, shimmering, vibrating, bending light and gravity alike. The floorboards cracked beneath Elias as he fell to his knees, clutching his head. The psychic pressure was immense. Voices layered over voices, chants over chants, whispers over whispers. The hollow was speaking directly to him. Through Mrs. Withers, through the children, through the earth itself. Join us! Become witness! Remain! The pull was irresistible. Elias felt his mind splintering, blending, merging into the consciousness of the hollow, tethered by a thread to his former self. He could see through the figure's eyes, hear through the house, feel through the desert. He understood, with unbearable clarity, the depth of the hollow's patience, the breadth of its ambition. Mrs. Withers approached, voice layered, with the hollow's intent. See what we are. See what waits. Embrace it, and you will witness eternity. The figures encircled him, pressing with synchronized motion, their black voids fixed on him. The parlor trembled violently, dust raining down in suffocating clouds. Shadows danced in impossible angles. Tendrils of earth emerged through walls and floor, curling toward the desert. Elias realized that reality itself was bending under the hollow's will, reshaping around its consciousness. And then the final push came. The hollow, through the Withers family and the desert, pressed into him fully. His thoughts splintered, his body became weightless, and his consciousness merged with the house, the children, the earth, and the desert. He was witness, conduit, participant, yet aware. The hollow had awakened fully, claiming permanence. The Withers house pulsed violently, a living nexus of soil, shadow, flesh, and madness. Mrs. Withers knelt in the center, chanting softly, eyes glowing, body flickering between human and something else. The figures, the children, moved in perfect synchronization, extensions of the hollow's will. The desert rippled with sentient motion, waves of sand and shadow forming humanoid shapes, advancing, extending the hollow's reach. Elias, tethered partially to the hollow, felt the scope of the breach. It was no longer a house, no longer a yard, no longer a desert. It was a node in an infinite network of waiting, patient intelligence. He understood the horror. The hollow's reach would continue, spreading patiently, inevitably, into realms beyond comprehension. Mrs. Withers whispered into his mind one last time, "We are eternal. We are patient. We are the waiting. And you are witness." The parlor shuddered violently. Shadows stretched into impossible geometries. Tendrils of earth and shadow pressed into the desert. The hollow's pulse echoed in the minds of any who dared approach, carrying whispers of obedience, of patience, of inevitability. Elias closed his eyes. He could feel the hollow fully awake, fully integrated, fully patient. The Withers were no longer humans. They were conduits. The house was no longer a building. It was a nexus. The desert was no longer a desert. It was alive, waiting, patient, and aware. And somewhere beyond comprehension, the first ripple of its influence moved outward, testing the world beyond the desert. The hollow was awake. It would not stop. The desert was no longer a passive expanse of sand and wind. It pulsed, it breathed. Every grain of soil, every shadow, every whispering wind carried the imprint of the hollow, extending outward in waves of patient inevitability. Elias Withers, tethered partially to its consciousness, understood in unbearable clarity. The hollow would never sleep again. It had awakened fully, integrated into the house, the family, and the surrounding land, and it waited. For eternity, for nothing, for all. The Withers house stood at the center of the pulse, a nexus of shadow, flesh, and soil. Every floorboard, every beam, every wall was alive. Dust spiraled in suffocating clouds, carried by currents of psychic energy. The air shimmered with impossible geometries. The figures, the children, circled endlessly, limbs bending at angles no human body should, eyes black voids of infinite patience. Mrs. Withers knelt at the center, chanting in that fractured tongue that had summoned the hollow over decades. Her form flickered between human and something else, sinew stretching, shadows merging, eyes gleaming like obsidian mirrors. Elias watched, tethered but still aware, the hollow tugging at his consciousness, pulling him deeper into the rhythm of its will. Outside, the desert shifted. The sand rippled, forming shapes of buried children, echoes of the past, distorted and alive. Shadows stretched across the dunes, curling and twisting, mimicking the figures inside. The wind carried whispers, a layered chorus of chants, voices, and silent urgings, calling to any who might wander too close. The hollow's reach had extended beyond the house, into the desert, into the soil, into the waiting void. Elias felt the full weight of what had been unleashed. The hollow was not merely a presence. It was a patient, sentient intelligence that had waited centuries to awaken fully. It did not merely consume, it integrated. It claimed. It wove the dead, the living, and the land into a single, unending organism. Every thought, every pulse, every breath in the house and beyond belonged to it now. The figures pressed closer, moving in perfect synchronization with Mrs. Withers. Their limbs bent, stretched, and folded into geometries impossible for the human mind to comprehend. The air hummed with psychic resonance. Elias could feel himself being woven further into the hollow's awareness. Yet a small fragment of his mind remained intact, observing, remembering, horrified. Mrs. Withers reached toward him, voice layered with authority and devotion, echoing in his skull. "You see now, Papa. We are eternal. We are patient. We are everything. You are witness. You are conduit. You are part of what waits." The floorboards trembled beneath him, the walls groaned, and dust spiraled into the air in suffocating clouds. Tendrils of soil and shadow pressed through the desert, curling toward the house, pulling buried echoes of children, remnants of ritual, fragments of reality itself into the growing nexus. The hollow's expansion was complete, unstoppable. Elias realized that resistance was no longer possible. The hollow did not merely seek obedience. It sought integration. It wove memory, flesh, shadow, and earth into a single consciousness. The Withers family, the house, and the desert were now extensions of it, conduits for its eternal patience. He could feel their awareness, their waiting, their intent. A tendril of sand and shadow crept along the parlor floor, curling around his legs, and he felt the hollow's pull intensify. Memories of burials, chants, exhumations, and whispers layered over each other, pressing into him, bending his will. He could see the cycle, repeating endlessly. Wait. Awaken, integrate, extend. The hollow was eternal, and the Withers were its vessel. The figures circled him, pressing, eyes unblinking voids of inevitability. One small figure, childlike yet grotesque, placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was icy, invasive, yet intimate. The hollow's presence folded into his consciousness, threading through every nerve, every thought, every memory. Mrs. Withers whispered, voice soft yet commanding. "Do not fear. You are part of the waiting. You are witness. You are eternal." The parlor groaned violently, walls and ceiling bending under the psychic weight of the hollow. Shadows flickered and multiplied, extending into the desert. The figures merged with walls, air, and light, becoming extensions of the house, extensions of the hollow itself. The pulse of the house synchronized with the desert, a heartbeat spanning land and consciousness. Elias, tethered partially, observed as the hollow extended further. Every buried child, every remnant of the Withers, every particle of soil responded to its will. The desert's shape shifted, dunes forming impossible patterns, echoing the ritual geometries of Mrs. Withers' chants. The hollow's consciousness reached outward, testing boundaries, expanding, patient, inevitable. He felt the first ripple beyond sight, a faint movement in the distant dunes, a subtle shift in wind patterns, a whisper carried far beyond the immediate vicinity. The hollow's influence would not remain confined. It was spreading, slowly, methodically, into the wider world. The patient waiting had become action. Elias struggled to retain his mind, yet the hollow's pull was absolute. He understood that he was no longer just a witness. He was a node, a conduit. Resistance was futile. He felt the Withers merging fully, flesh, shadow, and soil, integrated into the hollow's consciousness. The house had become an extension of the desert, and the desert an extension of the house. Mrs. Withers knelt, whispering the final phrases of the ritual, her voice layered with the hollow's intent, resonating through every particle of sand, every shadow, every pulse. The figures circled endlessly, limbs bending in impossible synchrony. Elias felt himself drawn further, threads of memory and thought intertwining with the hollow's will. The desert outside shimmered unnaturally. Shapes of sand and shadow moved toward the horizon, carrying fragments of consciousness, echoes of the Withers family, extensions of the hollow's reach. It would wait, always, but it would also act, slowly, inevitably, expanding across land, memory, and reality. Elias, tethered yet observing, understood the final truth. The hollow would never sleep. The Withers were no longer humans. The house was no longer a building. The desert was no longer inert. All were conduits, extensions of a patient, eternal intelligence that had waited centuries for release. He felt the final pull, the hollow seeking complete integration. His mind splintered, memory folding into consciousness, identity dissolving, tethered only by a fragment of awareness. He saw the desert's shapes, the Withers, the figures, the house, all merged, alive, patient, waiting. The wind carried whispers of obedience, of patience, of inevitability. Shadows stretched, dunes shifted, the pulse of the hollow extended outward, and Elias understood. The waiting was eternal. The hollow was awake. The Withers were its vessels. The desert itself was alive. He closed his eyes. The house pulsed once, the desert rippled once, the hollow whispered once, and then silence, patient, eternal, waiting. Somewhere beyond comprehension, the first ripple moved outward, carrying the hollow's consciousness toward the world beyond the desert, carrying its patience, its intent, its inevitability. The hollow would continue. The waiting would continue. And Elias, forever tethered, would remain a witness to the eternal, patient horror that had awakened. The desert waited, and the hollow waited with it.